Hey guys, it's Sasha. Getting your first credit card can be incredibly daunting. So many people get constantly declined, not knowing what it is that they're doing wrong, also not knowing what it is that they should be doing right, and how to actually go and get started. Credit cards have built up a really bad reputation. A lot of people say that it's really bad for you, that you shouldn't have one because, you can go and get in debt and it can be a perpetual problem, and there is some merit to that line of thinking. They can be a really bad thing in some circumstances for some people, but used right, a credit card can be an incredibly good thing for building your credit, for improving so many different aspects of your life, from getting a mobile phone contract at a decent rate through to being able to purchase a house later on in life. There are so many different benefits for getting a credit card and using it the right way that a lot of people naturally want to go and do it. But what is the best way for doing it? Well, I'm going to break down exactly what it is that you need to do if you're in that situation. If you wanted to go and get your first credit card, what you need to do to improve your chances, what the best way of doing it is. So listen on, but just before I get there, a really brief disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I can't provide financial advice to you, and if you do need financial advice, please make sure you go and seek the help of a suitably qualified professional. Well, now that's out of the way, to start with, before you do anything else, the best thing to do if you're just considering getting your first credit card is just to go and check your eligibility without making full applications for specific credit cards. Making a full application with a particular company will leave a marker on your credit file. There'll be a marker saying that you made a credit application. And if you have too many of those markers, that factor alone can be the reason why you get declined from credit cards in the future, especially if you have too many of them. Some credit card providers will actually decline you if you've made 3 applications or more for credit in the last 3 months. So if you've been making quite a few of them, the first tip here is to not make any more, to go and wait it out a little bit. But what you can do is you can go and do a check for your eligibility without leaving those markers. If you go into Money Supermarket and Totally Money, for example, those are probably the best two, in my personal opinion. I have no commercial affiliation with them. You can go and use any other comparison websites that you prefer if you choose to, but you can generally get a very comprehensive coverage from using, for example, these two, especially for first-time credit cards. When you put in all your details into these, you'll get a comparison output screen, which will show you all the different credit cards that you are eligible for, and some of them will tell you something like pre-approved or 10 out of 10 as a likelihood, and that is a great sign. If you get one of those, you are done. You are sorted. You can go and get your first credit card. It means that unless there's something really odd about you, like there are some fraud markers against you on some fraud systems which they haven't yet checked, you should be able to go and get one of those credit cards absolutely no problem. Remember though, for your very first credit card, it really doesn't matter at all what credit card it is. You don't need to flex. You don't need a shiny platinum card. None of that matters. You are here to improve your financial position, to improve your credit. And all of the different credit cards will do pretty much exactly the same thing here. Pretty much all of them will report to multiple bureaus these days. So just go and get whatever good, decent, well-known brand credit card that you can that will accept you. Will accept you is the only thing that you care about at this stage, because all the other things will come down the line. Just make sure you choose one that doesn't have annual fees or monthly fees, because you don't want to be paying them until the point where maybe you'll feel like the perks might be worth it. Although for your first one, I would wager that they probably aren't. Now, if at this stage you don't qualify for anything, if you get messages saying that you're not eligible or only very low chances, like 2 out of 10, then you might need to go and do some work on your credit profile. And here is what I would do if I was in that situation. First, I would go and sign up for the free credit report from each of the 3 credit reference agencies in the UK. Now, the thing here is, do not go and sign up on the actual website of each of those agencies. They all have these reports available and have free trials. But free trials are only for a short period, sometimes 14 days, sometimes a month or thereabouts, and then they're going to begin charging you quite expensive fees. So don't do that, because all of them have a free version that doesn't have a freemium or a free trial or anything. It is so easy to go and do that. So for Experian, you can use the Money Saving Expert Credit Club. For Equifax, you can sign up with ClearScore, and for TransUnion, you can go and use Credit Karma. All of these are completely free. Ignore the credit score that each of these give. Each of these will give you a number, and that number means nothing whatsoever. In fact, the credit card companies that will be doing your assessment don't even get that number. and let alone use it for any kind of decisioning. So the credit score number like 900 or 780 means nothing at all. So I would just go and ignore it for now. It's a good overall indicator of sorts, but it doesn't really mean much on its own. Now, the key is go and look at the accounts that are listed on there. Go and look at your personal details. Can you see anything on there? Is the data correct? Is your address data correct? Are there any warning flags displayed? Are there any kind of things that they're saying that they don't have that maybe you can go and fill in? If any of these things are not right, you can go and work either with the account provider if the data within the account is not right, or with a credit reference agency to go and put them right. And it might take some time, but it's definitely worth doing. If you don't already, see if you can get some form of credit on top after doing that from anywhere that will give you some data into your credit profile, but don't go and just get some kind of loan or some kind of expensive high cost credit or some kind of expensive form of borrowing. Those will actually do you in many cases more harm than good. Even aside from the high cost, if you go and get payday loan type lending, that is actually a negative marker on your profile rather than a positive one. So make sure you stay away from all of those kind of things because it definitely won't help. If you don't already have one, a mobile phone contract is a great way as a first step because they are often relatively easy to get. And if you don't have one but you want one, that might be a good place to start. Although just be very careful without paying way too much for the privilege. And a mobile phone contract isn't quite as useful as other forms of credit because not all credit card companies will actually consider that credit data. Not many credit card companies don't even buy mobile phone contract data for their decisioning. Even better, if your bank will offer you an overdraft, go and take it. Overdrafts are a form of revolving credit, very similar to credit cards, and those will also begin reporting to credit bureaus. So if your bank says that you are eligible and you can go and get it, go and tick that box. It doesn't matter how big it is. If it's £100 or £200, that's perfectly good enough. They will begin reporting data to the credit reference agency. You'll kind of feel like you'll have a credit card and you'll be able to show that you are responsible, that you're not perpetually in debt, and that is a really good starting point as well. If you've had the same bank account for some time and your bank also does credit cards, that might also be a good place to check, especially if you go and log into your account and see if you have any pre-checks done and if you're pre-qualified for one of those credit cards, because that can be easier than getting a credit card with a company that knows nothing about you, unlike the bank who has seen your bank statements month in, month out, year in, year out. Next, if you don't have any of those options, one thing you might consider is going and checking which bank accounts actively advertise having overdrafts and say that that's one of the key features of the account and do a big marketing play around it, because the likelihood is they have probably a current account that is quite likely to give you that overdraft facility. So you might go and choose to go and check if you're eligible for one of those, go and apply, and if you go and get that overdraft, that can be your first form of credit instead. Just make sure that you use it responsibly. Don't go and sit in your overdraft. Don't do any of those things because that's actually gonna, again, do more harm than good. Then, after doing all of that, consider some of the other reasons why you might be getting declined, because these are also important things to fix. A credit card company will typically do 3 different types of checks when deciding whether to lend you by giving you a credit card or not. They're the credit check, a fraud check, and an affordability check. As this is your first form of credit, you probably won't have issues with fraud, but make sure you go and sign up to those things that I told you to sign up for before to check in case there's any weird markers. Now, for affordability, you need to make sure that you are earning money, because affordability basically says, can you afford the monthly repayments on your credit card if you were to go and get it? And if you don't have a permanent job, if you don't have a job that pays you any kind of stable money, if you have only a small part-time job that only pays you a very small amount of money, you may well get declined because of the affordability. And you need to go and ensure that you actually have a job that pays you money in order to be able to qualify. If you're a young person and say you're at university and you don't have a job but you have student grants or your parents are supporting you, those are not real forms of income and they will not be considered as income by those companies, or at least they shouldn't be. So unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until you actually have the ability to go and get a credit card. In some cases, when you're a student, your bank, your student account will qualify you for a student credit card without you needing a full-time income, or maybe without needing any income at all and a very low credit limit. That might be one of the options, but in most other cases you will have to wait until you actually have an income, because with credit it is the right thing to do to make sure that the person applying can actually go and pay the money back. Now, if you pass those two, the other thing is the credit check. And the credit check is split into two parts with almost all credit providers. There's a set of policy rules, which is sort of yes/no questions as to whether you'll get the credit card or not. And then there's a credit score, which is more like a big calculation using lots of different variables, and then they will decide whether or not you pass on the credit score as well. Now, both the policy rules and the credit score are completely different between all the different providers. It's not like in the US, if you watch any US videos where there's one score that matters. Here, everyone's score will be completely different. And so you can't go and game it in any way other than doing all the right things with your credit profile. And unfortunately, you probably won't be able to do very much about the score other than the things that I've already mentioned, and having some form of credit, not getting into debt and things like that. But if you get an overdraft or a credit card, do not carry a balance and repay in full every single month. You probably should be okay on that. The policy rules, however, can be based on a few criteria that you might not have thought about, which would decline you for things that you haven't thought. So for example, matching you at the bureau is a really important thing. What happens when you go and apply is they're going to take your data and they're going to pull your data from the bureau to go and make their credit assessment. If they can't match you to the bureau, you will be declined just because of that alone, without any reason because of your behavior or your credit profile. So if you, for example, live in student halls or a flat with very many occupants, those can be really big negative markers because your address will be the same as the address for many hundreds of other people. And the credit card company will be thinking, can we actually reach that person in the future? They're likely to stay living there. Like some of them might even have criteria saying we won't lend to addresses which have hundreds of people living at exactly the same address because it might be harder to reach you. You might become untraceable in the future if you owe them money. All of these kind of reasons. So that's one thing to consider. Another is your address that you live in might not actually match the data at the bureau. So be very careful. This happens more than people think. So you might live in somewhere which is flat 1A. And when you receive your post, you get it and it's very easy. But when you go and check with the credit reference agency, that flat is actually called lower ground floor flat. Check the way your address is written on the bureau by going back to those 3 things that you've signed up for. Make sure exactly the format of exactly how it's written is the same, because that alone can be the reason why being declined. If you frequently change addresses, your recent address may not actually be on the system, or you might raise potential fraud flags if this is the first time you're applying from a new address, or you might hit some other rule that one of these lenders has, because staying at addresses for short periods of time is a risk factor. It means that you don't have a stable place where you live, you might not have a stable job, you might not have the ability for the credit card company to reach you in the future. So that's a big thing. Remember, the way the credit scoring and data works is really quite simple. So don't overcomplicate it. If, for example, you do have a permanent address where you live, let's say you live with your parents primarily, all your stuff is there, you have your bedroom there, that's where you live. But sometimes for short periods of time, because of whatever, you might spend a few weeks in one place or a few weeks in another place, or maybe a month somewhere, or whatever it is. You might choose to go and keep your main address where you live for all of your financial needs. So all your statements go there, so that all your credit history is based there, so that you don't have this whole history of jumping around. Now, you have to be a bit careful. You don't want to commit fraud by pretending to live somewhere where you do not live. So make sure you don't do that, but just think about it in terms of how the credit card company will be looking at it. If you have a new address every 3 months, that might be an issue in terms of verifying where you live, and it might also be an issue with matching you at the bureau. Now, one really important thing with young people is you shouldn't go and make too many applications. I already mentioned this, but typically credit card providers will be looking at the number of applications you made in the last 3 months, or in some cases in the last 6 months. And those numbers are going to be low. Like some of the more loose providers will accept you if you've had up to 4 or maybe even 5 applications. Some of them will have a much more stringent criteria. So literally having 3 or 4 applications for credit in the last 4 to 6 months can be the reason why you're being declined by many people. So if you just step back and stop applying for things, just take a breather and just give it a bit of time, suddenly you might be qualifying just because of that reason alone. Adverse credit history, something that most people who are applying for their first credit card probably don't have, but if you do, if you have previous defaults, if you have any kind of charge off in the past, any kind of debt that has gone bad, a county court judgment, all of these things will be extremely serious and play against you. And they might be the reason why you don't qualify for credit. This marker, any of those kind of markers, bankruptcy, etc., will stay on your report for 6 years. And most credit card companies will not lend to you if you have any of those markers in the last 18 to 24 months. And the majority probably will want at least 3 years gap from when that marker happened until they might consider you. So if you have any of those markers, unfortunately, the best thing you can do is wait and make sure that in the meantime, everything on your credit report is as good as it can be. Now, one last thing to make things really obvious, you cannot be currently behind on any of your debt repayments, or, in the recent past, you can't be behind on any debt repayments. So if you missed a payment, for example, you probably won't qualify for lending immediately after doing that. And if you missed a payment in the last 3 to 6 months, in some cases in the last 12 months on something, even if you've since brought your account back up to speed, that might also be a reason why you're not qualifying. And again, the only thing you can do really is wait. Now, go back after doing all of these things and making sure that everything's good. Go back and check your credit profiles with those 3 different agencies regularly to make sure that everything is doing what it should be, to make sure that the data is going in and it's saying that everything is green and up to date. Make sure that you don't use those same websites that you're using for checking your credit for checking eligibility for products, because they will show you products, but they typically have a very small range of products and they are commercially incentivized in a different way to only sell those. So I'll go personally back to the big comparison websites and recheck them every 3 months, for example, just to see what my progress is and whether suddenly I'm become eligible for something where previously I wasn't. Once you do get your first credit card, make sure you don't do anything that you don't want to do with it. Make sure you just put regular purchases on it, set up a direct debit to pay it in full every single month. I have a whole separate video. I'm going to put the link up here in the description below where I talk exactly what you need to do with your first credit card to build your credit. So make sure you go and check it out if you're interested. And if you do all of these things and you make sure that you go and get that first credit card when you do become eligible, your credit will improve and you will be eligible for more credit cards with good perks and generally all the other benefits of having good credit over your life. So go ahead and make the most of it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it when it gets to the end of one of my videos. And as always, I'll see you guys later.